Just a disclaimer, the opinions expressed in this podcast are our own views and views of our guests. Nothing in this podcast is to be taken as legal advice.
LexisNexis is a proud sponsor of That's Just Criminal podcast. Remember, AI won't replace lawyers, but lawyers using AI will. Make LexisNexis your preferred legal AI research and productivity technology partner. Find out more at lexisnexis.co.nz. The That's Just Criminal podcast is proudly sponsored by the Criminal Bar Association of New Zealand. The CBA was set up in 1984 and provides support and collegiality to criminal practitioners in New Zealand, whether they are defence lawyers, prosecutors, judges, academics or students. For more information visit www.criminalbar.org.nz. Now let's get on with the episode.
Kia ora, tēnā koe. Welcome to That's Just Criminal with me, Annabelle Creswell, and my co-host,
Samudu Thode.
Today we are talking about a topic that's been of some interest to me and Samudu ever since we read about Nicola Gobbo. She was otherwise known as Lawyer X, and many of you will have heard about. She was the Melbourne barrister, criminal barrister, who was being used as a police informant. And she was, in fact, listening to her client or seeing her clients, advising her clients, and then running off to police and informing on them.
So in Melbourne, she was called a human source, which we know as informants or informers. But basically what it means is that she was secretly knocking on her clients and passing the information that she was getting in her role as a criminal lawyer.
The whole matter came to light because police tried to turn her from informant into witness, and at that point it was going to become extremely dangerous for her. And of course, when people found out, they were understandably horrified. They launched a Royal Commission of Enquiry in Australia into the police use and management of human sources. What we want to talk about today is how that affected other criminal barristers in Melbourne. Were they shocked? Did they lose trust? Did the public or their clients lose trust in them? Were they angry? How did they support each other? And how much goddamn work was there overturning these unsafe convictions?
Or has that work been done yet? Or is that still in the process? Because we know that as criminal defence lawyers, we're already overrun with work. This would put an enormous amount of pressure on lawyers who are already overworked and potentially, with legal aid rates, underpaid.
The Royal Commission of Enquiry came up with some figures, and it looks like there was about 1,100 unsafe convictions. More importantly, the Royal Commission strongly denounced the conduct of Victoria Police and Nicola Gobbo. Their conclusion was Ms. Gobbo's actions in purporting to act as counsel for the convicted persons while covertly informing against them were fundamental and appalling breaches of her obligations as counsel to her clients and of her duties to the court. Likewise, Victoria Police were guilty of reprehensible conduct and knowingly encouraging Ms. Gobbo to do as she did, and were involved in sanctioning atrocious breaches of the sworn duty of every police officer. Really strong words there from the Australian High Court.
And everybody had an opinion on not only Nicola Gobbo's actions, but the impact of that on the system. One of the Crown prosecutors said it trashes the whole criminal justice system. It's the relationship of trust that we have with the public. It just goes to the heart of the justice system as a whole when one of our own does something like this.
So how would we feel if that happened here in New Zealand? I mean, I would say I would be super mad if I heard that any one of my colleagues was doing that. What would your reaction be, Samudu?
Definitely throat punch.
100%. 100%.
Doing things that questions what the public think and feel about criminal defence lawyers. And let's be honest, we have a bad enough reputation as it is. You know,
no one likes
regularly
us.
We get asked, how do we sleep at night? How do you
Yeah.
defend the guilty? We have a bad enough reputation in the eyes of the public because we're doing the work that most people don't want to do. And then
Yeah.
to have one of our own really just pull the carpet underneath us in a way that it's just basic 101 obligations as a lawyer.
I mean, I often say criminal lawyers also, we're rough and rangy, but everyone's a bleeding heart. We're helping the most vulnerable people, the people without a voice. We're the ones that will sit with someone who no one wants to defend. But the one thing that you wouldn't do to someone that vulnerable is to take the information that they give you and instead of helping them, turn them over
Make
to
it
police.
worse for them.
And I'm just trying to think of where anything like that has happened here in New Zealand, where one of our own colleagues has undermined the trust that we have. The only one I can think of, and we won't name names, but what I will say is a little bit difficult for female barristers like us to enter the prison these days, because more than 10 years ago now, a female barrister started a relationship with one of her clients in maximum security. He was a murderer, reasonably well known. They were in love. It was love. They got married and they're still married, but she was smuggling things in, including a phone, to him in prison. We don't need to say how she smuggled it in. And that was like 10 years ago, and it's still like super searched. They don't really trust us. They all think we're trying to smuggle things into our clients who we're, of course, in love with. I can't think of any other scandal like that in New Zealand. It must feel the same for police. Like, it's really that whole thing, one bad apple and then you're all seen as rotten. And it's the same for the police in this particular case, right? The police have behaved appallingly from a really high level. So many people really high up in the ranks must have sanctioned this and known about it and continued to use her and destroyed lives. But not all police are terrible.
So it's not just about her conduct, it's what the police were doing as well, knowing that she's a lawyer, knowing what lawyers' obligations are, knowing the position that it put her in.
So what we wanted to do today, Samudu, was talk to somebody, a random representative from the Melbourne Bar, didn't we?
Well, yeah, because there's so many other podcasts about the facts of Nicola Gobbo and what happened, and it's all publicly available information. So this isn't about us just reciting the facts to you. What we wanted to know was the impact of that offending
on other criminal lawyers like us. So I found someone, I just got a friend of a friend said, recommend me a Melbourne barrister, emailed Rishi Nathwani and said, would you please be on the podcast? This is what we want to talk about. Then I Googled him. Two things became very apparent. Number one, boy, is he good looking. Number two, he actually was Nicola Gobbo's lawyer for the Royal Commission. Not through the whole lot of it, but for the Royal Commission. So he'd kind of agreed to come and talk to us before I realised he actually acted for her. So I think you'll agree it's a bit of a coup we've got him here, but I don't think we'll ask him too much direct questions about his...
because we value confidentiality and client privilege. We want to know whether that's affected the lawyer's relationships and the client's relationships with the police and what the public perception's been as well, and whether anything good's actually come out of this whole saga as well. So today we've got Rishi Nathwani with us, and Rishi's been a lawyer in England and in Wales, and now he's been in the Victorian Bar in Melbourne for about 5 years. He was called to the inner bar as a senior counsel or an SC last year in 2023 after only about 5 years in Victoria. I'm told that Rishi does mostly serious criminal offending, so, well, not that you do criminal offending, represents clients facing serious criminal offending like murder and terrorism, organised crime, drug offending, sexual abuse, and Rishi does coronial inquests and public inquiries. So this is where Rishi got involved representing Nicola Gobbo, or Lawyer X, in the Royal Commission. Welcome, Rishi. Thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Thanks for having me. Be interesting to chat to you and your interest in Nicola and all things Lawyer X.
We'll do some general chatting before we actually start being serious about the podcast.
And we're not that serious, to be fair.
You can even say swear words. Jane has promised to edit them out, but in the first episode I said cockbag, and then she thought it was good, and she's kept it in. So you can go as high as cockbag,
Yeah.
not higher. Okay, so Rishi, just to explain why we wanted to talk to you, was we were quite interested in the Nicola Gobbo story from here. And there's been a lot of interest in it, I think, probably worldwide, because I don't know anywhere else something has happened like this with an actual criminal barrister. We keep calling it knocking up her clients, informing on her clients. But we were more interested, because this is a criminal lawyers podcast, we were interested in how that impacted the bar. First of all, how you all felt and the trust and the breach that you might have felt. And secondly, the amount of work that would have come out of the appeals. So that was the gist of what we wanted to talk to someone from the Melbourne Bar about. So I got your name, got you to agree before I realised you actually did act for her later in the Royal Commission. So I'm gathering that there's certain amounts that you're not going to want to comment on or speak about.
Oh, there's some stuff I'll comment on, but
Yeah.
I'm sure you realise you can ask. You can see where we go.
Yeah, exactly. But your accent sounds British.
I am
Not
an Englishman. Yeah.
Ah.
Good. Well done. You're winning. This is good. It's when
Okay.
someone turns to me and says, "You sound Aussie," I'm like, fuck off.
Okay, I think that's the first F-bomb we've had.
Sorry.
So.
I think cockbag.
Own it.
The first thing we want to ask about is when it all first came to light that one of you had been informing, and it was sanctioned by police, that one of you had been informing. How did you, as the bar, feel? Was there a sense of anger and outrage?
The Victorian Bar certainly was angry and outraged. I was in a slightly different boat, so probably answer that question in two ways, because I had just arrived in Victoria in 2018, and this all kind of came to life at the end of 2018, early 2019 from memory. The Victorian Bar was outraged, and quite a lot of the Victorian Bar knew Nicola, and outraged for a few reasons. One, Nicola was doing some of the best work at the time, and I'm sure there were some people who perhaps were a little bit jealous, and at times, I think Nicola would admit, would probably had rubbed some of them up the wrong way. But then separately, just completely separate to all of that, as diehard defence practitioners, and we are diehard defence practitioners at the criminal bar, at the Vic Bar. There's some people who prosecute and defend, but there's mainly hardcore defenders. It was, the antithesis of what we stand for. And then personally, when I was first called about doing the case and representing Nicola, I almost turned it down, which is madness. Looking back now. And the reason I almost turned it down was because I was new, just started doing quite well with the defence crime stuff. And I was like, oh God, I know, like any defence practitioner, once I started representing Nicola, I'd fight pretty hard for her. How would I feel considering, on the face of it, without knowing any of the material, she was alleged to have done something that's contrary to what we all believe in, which is, the rights of our clients and their confidentiality in the way she did for the police, of all people.
So what made you say yes?
Because I was worried how I would be perceived by a lot of the solicitors I was doing work for and colleagues. What made me say yes? A family member, I remember it quite well, said to me, how is this different morally from defending the person who has killed someone, or defending some of the terrorists who planned to blow up England in one of the biggest trials that was on at the time for 6 months when I was there, and, cause heinous acts and want to kill pretty much anyone, could even include me. And that resonated with me. How's it different? Nicola was and is entitled to defence in some of these matters, no different to any of our other clients. It just happens to be she's trespassed on things that we hold dear as defence practitioners, but as humans we hold dear, I hope, life and some of the other things we represent people for. All right, so before I came here, I was aware, because, classically, when I'm not working, when I switch off, I still quite like criminal-based stuff, and I watch the trashy criminal shows, which I love, all the detectives. But I've also, so years ago, obviously, because my partner, ex-wife, was an Aussie, I watched the first Underbelly, and then I watched all of them, just but the first one was about exactly what's going on, so I knew about it. It's an amazing narrative because they link all these different killings and murders to each other, the gangland war, and then when they're all dead, Mockbell lives, and it goes through then. It just transcends all of it.
Yeah. So you're a crime nerd, and it was interesting as well.
I mean, it
And
was
it's just
literally
juicy.
about 80 cases, 70, like massive cases all intertwined, and you're like, it would never happen again. So I squared it pretty quickly, and thank God I did.
Yeah, and I think I guess we would all come to that conclusion, wouldn't you yourself? There've been some gnarly ones here, I guess, like the Christchurch mosque shooter
quite.
as well. I think we all sat there going, who's going to get that? No one wants that. But of course, whoever got the call was going to take it because that is part of the role, isn't it?
Yeah. It's just because we hold it so dear to ourselves. As if you're a real legal practitioner, defence barristers especially, it's the golden rule and it's a breach of everything that's fundamental. But look, as it happens, I think the Royal Commission showed to some degree that Nicola was undoubtedly, as she accepted, involved in the way she was, but she had some pressure brought to bear on her, and the police used her as they used other people.
We know that the Australian courts have described their conduct as corrupt and atrocious. Did it make a difference to your working relationships with the police there?
It has done with some. It was really, the Royal Commission's very funny because you sit there and the police are represented. Saul was representing Victoria Police. He's obviously a New Zealander, but he was quite good at smoothing over things with different parties. And, the police they had on show as providing the disclosure, working with the good ones who would talk to you, police witnesses that were called, you wouldn't necessarily trust them. And I'm sure, my view is certain would do the same again if they could. You could just see some of their answers and some of the dishonesty, in my view, of some of them in their evidence. But at the end of the day, a lot of them you see now in homicide, they're senior homicide coppers or have been in con, and they were the younger ones. They were probably guided from above. Nicola's handlers, for example, I am quite sympathetic towards because they were just the unit told to do what they were told to do. And they were obeying orders that were criminal in my view, but the DPP has decided not. And they were I think it was just a completely different time back then here. Not that it's a defence to it. You always think there's some issues with the police. I have to say, I don't particularly trust Victoria Police because I'm not sure I would have trusted the Met Police or the Terror Police in the UK. Do you know what I mean? We're defence practitioners. There's a deep distrust of the police, and clients come to us and say, this copper beat me up. And you see him say to someone who's not got our experience, and they'll go, the police would do that. Or a juror not believing in police misconduct, then we readily do,
I guess, if you think about the Victorian Bar, how did it kind of impact day-to-day dealings with the police, though?
The police tried to silo off. I mean, I don't know if you've even seen today, there's a bill that's to be introduced. It's literally been launched today to stop civil payouts to anybody by virtue of the police conduct, the state conduct, in relation to the Lawyer X stuff.
Why? Because it was getting too expensive.
It's going to cost them a bomb, isn't it? There's all these lawsuits about to be launched, and so they're trying to pass legislation. Today it came out. It's all over the papers there.
Do you think they'll get that through?
I hope not, but I just can't see how it. We'll see. I can't see how the High Court won't get involved with it. How can you be responsible as a state for something and then say we owe people, but because it's going to cost us too much, we're going to retrospectively pass legislation say, actually, do you know what? We're not going to pay anyone else anymore.
It's outrageous.
It's dictatorship.
Yeah, it really is.
I'm actually astonished.
Yeah.
But didn't they sort of throw $20 million at the Royal Commission Enquiry? There were delays and things, but the additional funding for that was about 20 million Australian.
It must have cost a packet. The Royal Commission itself. I thought the special investigator, Geoffrey Nettle, High Court judge, retired, and his team were about 20 mil.
But no money for the poor people who were affected by it, people struggling.
Yeah, not for the clients.
People whose lives and families and fathers had to go to prison. No compensation for them, according to the Australian government.
That's the argument. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's an unbelievable bit of legislation, 8 pages long. It just says no one will get a civil payout.
Oh my God, it's so bad.
I assume there's people that are going to fight this
Fight
because
it.
clearly this is screaming out for compensation.
Yeah. I mean, there's already lawsuits, civil lawsuits. Look, one of them, Nicola's suing the state and the police for their conduct towards her. That's reported in the press. Farouk Orman, who was released, is suing them, and he's got a claim that's right in the mix of it. He was released after 11 years of his 12-year sentence.
So who is doing this work? So there must be way more. These are the big dogs you're talking about, but there must be other ones that she acted for or that were affected.
They say there were loads and loads. The Royal Commission had these enormous numbers. There's a difference between people she acted for and told the police about what was going on as to whose convictions were impacted in particular ways. I understand it to be about 100 cases, they say. It's something I read today, I think in the same article about what's going on in compensation, about 100 said to be potentially affected convictions. But it's madness. That what's going on at the moment is the Royal Commission had material provided to us, and it was highly sensitive because it involved information provided to the police, proper intelligence, and you had to link it all together. Even I, despite being Nicola's representative, had to, and she was the provider of that information in those reports, would have to go to secret locations to see it and had to get permission to speak to her about it. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's her information. When it's come to the appeals, I'm aware that what Victoria Police provides as a special redaction team is redacted materials to the individuals beyond the material I had. And we're in closed court sometimes it's redacted. So they're going into these legal arguments in front of judges who don't know what's going on because they're hearing the appeals with half the material.
Oh my God.
100 seems like a really small number when you look at the number of reports she made, but also if you think about, she might have made one report and then that's led to an operation that arrested 10, 15, 20 people. 100 people seems like a really small number, doesn't it?
I think no, not really. They were focusing on a small group is what it looked like. And I think that's what the commission accepted finding. It's been a while since I looked at it. They wanted mock bail, and to get mock bail, they decided they'd get the underlings, get them to roll on the next level, and they'd all keep rolling until the evidence was overwhelming against mock bail, and he was convicted in one and pleaded guilty to others. So that was the aim. And then once they got him, they moved it to a separate bit of criminality. It looked like they were looking at a couple of other people. Gatto, I know they looked at one point. So I don't know if 100's that many, too many.
Yeah.
I think it's quite a lot.
Yeah, I think we maybe thought there was more of it, but that we were only hearing about the big ganglands kind of stuff. But I guess if you and they Royal Commission accepted that was kind of the main stuff she's used for. She wasn't seeing smaller clients and just.
She might see a smaller client and say something to him about what he said or did, but more often than not, it's already in the pub arena. It may not have been privileged and certainly didn't affect their convictions. So, the court of appeal stuff here at the moment is trying to see how her conduct affected the evidence or infected trials or the process.
I just can't believe they're not being more forthcoming, just going, we've really cocked up. We're just going to be the good guys for a while. Here's everything. We want to make it right. But it seems like
that's what Victoria Police liked people to think. And so they got the face of them who do that. But I'm not sure that's transcended to actual disclosure of documents. And even in the Royal Commission hearings, there were bits of material, the commissioner, they tried to hide from her to begin with. And then there'd be these arguments. It's just kept us mad.
It's madness.
I remember on day one, there was a schedule because I can't remember how many of us had standing leave, because that was the other thing that was interesting. You'd have a party, I think there were 6 or 7 parties with standing leave, always there, always permitted to question, always to get the material. And then for other parties would turn up. So, let's say mock bail, lawyers would turn up and ask to cross-examine or make submissions for certain days, then disappear. On the first day, there was this key document, and there were 8 versions of it in different redacted forms at the bar table. So counsel assisting had the least redacted or probably all redacted. And then amongst all of us, there were different versions. And you're supposed to be standing up making submissions. It was madness.
How much contact did you have with Nicola through the inquest?
I was able to, well, fairly frequent.
One of the things that Annabelle and I talked about, because we've both had cases where, everybody's interested and it kind
Well,
of
in New Zealand, it's not very hard to have a case where there's a lot
Yeah.
of media attention because not a lot happening. So,
Yeah,
there's
it
like
can be
one
just a
case.
shoplifting and everybody wants to get involved in the media act, but go on.
How did you deal with everybody's interest in your role? Did you sort of have to deal with any backlash, or was there sort of people going, how can you do this?
there's bits and pieces of that, but it wasn't too bad. Like I said, obviously I'd only been here a year, not even. And I had my views. I think I probably got the gig because I was the most senior, least conflicted barrister here, which was one issue. And there are a few people, it's funny. I remember now people going in for their clients, not knowing me and going hard. And then I'm going back at them. We've become friends since. At the time, it was no love lost, and it was going at people. Yeah, the media part was quite funny because I probably didn't appreciate how big a Royal Commission was. I just thought, oh, yeah. And Melbourne's, to me, a little bit like you described New Zealand. I come from London, where murders happen and they're not reported in the press every day of the trial because there's so many cases going on. The Old Bailey's a court with 20 courtrooms that just hear murder trials, usually. So when I got here, it's funny because the media have a lot of contact with you. And I've got used to that in the first year. But when the Royal Commission was on, it was crazy because Nicola wasn't here in person. And as a consequence, the press liked to make someone the face of it. And, as it happens, I became the face of Nicola for the media. And I remember trying to go and get lunch sometimes and having cameras follow you down the road, like literally like they do of clients.
Yeah, it's
It's
not
just
as
madness.
glamorous as it
Yeah,
it is when you just want to get a pie for your lunch.
No. And I bantered with them and had a laugh with them, but at the same time, it was like, look, cockbag, get that camera on my face. I'm trying to go and get my lunch. You've got your shot.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, and what about the other barristers? I also think that whenever we've got anything in the news, the other barristers all want to give you their view or start putting bets on whether you're going to get a good result for them. And did you have a bit of that?
Yeah, there's a bit of that. And even at the bar table, it's funny though, we all the main parties all tended to get on ultimately.
And I assume there would have been really stressful times and then also times where you're just bored and talking. Well, was it always high pressure in the commission?
I'm usually pretty relaxed. I think in my view, there was only one day where it felt like a bit of pressure. And that's when I learned, I just spent all day arguing. I thought I should have won the argument actually, and others did, that Nicola be excused from giving evidence on medical grounds. Yeah. And the commissioner, who's McMurdo, Margaret McMurdo, former Queensland Court of Appeal judge, adjourned it to the future with all the politics. And like that night, I got a phone call saying, oh, Nicola's done an interview with a TV program.
Oh, yes, I saw this. Yeah, yeah. And the commissioner was not best pleased.
So I remember spoke to Chris, who had a chat with me privately and said, did you know? And I said, of course I didn't. And he said, oh, it's lucky it was adjourned. And then I was told she was going to ask me in court, which she did in front of everyone. And
what I thought from an outsider that was surprising is how strongly it was worded, how strongly they spoke out against the police and the corruption. That was nice. But then it sounds like they're not putting the weight of action behind those words.
Well, what followed was Jeffrey Nettle's team then investigated, and they quite clearly, I don't know if you've seen the public spat between him and the DPP.
Right.
So he recommended charges on one brief, sent the brief to the Director of Public Prosecutions. It included a statement from Nicola in support of the prosecution, which obviously we were involved in our discussions with him in relation to that. And the DPP said, I'm not charging. I don't believe her. I'm not prepared to charge. And he'd investigate. He's a pretty important person, pretty influential High Court judge, or retired High Court judge. And if you go and have a look, there's letters that he then published that she then wrote in public, and they just had this public spat about.
Oh.
And she basically said, for as long as she's DPP, she won't recommend charges. And then added to that, she sent Nicola's statement which was meant to be kept secret, to Victoria Police to redact. So the people she named.
It's
It's
just
madness.
unbelievable. Yeah, it is madness. So, I mean, in terms of there being, if this DPP moved on and there were charges, I mean, you and the bar would be supportive of that, I would assume.
As long as it's not of Nicola.
Yeah. I mean, of the police, I'm assuming.
Yeah, although, what's the Royal Commission evidence, you could never pin down, because it was all arm's length, who signed it off, the top bodies. So those in the firing line are the obvious people to charge, such as one or two of the handlers. But what's the benefit in charging them and prosecuting them?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
There's no point. It's the top people.
Upstairs, yeah.
Yeah. And it was pretty obvious. The evidence is not there to link them to it, but there's things that make you believe or suspect, and I don't know what was or was not ultimately published, that there are those way higher up who we all know who authorised it in all likelihood, that if Nettle can't find charges against, so what's the point?
Exactly. Don't bother.
There'll be no trace going back to them, so they'll be untouchable regardless.
Yeah. So I don't really see much interest in going after the handlers, the footmen. It's the people who were behind it who should be gone after.
Yeah, definitely.
And, there's the other rule as well, isn't there? All convention about Royal Commissions is quite a lot of material that if you give evidence at one of these public inquiries, it's almost the state foregoing charges against you because they're compelling you to give evidence. You lose your right to silence. It's like choose one or the other.
Yeah.
So maybe we should follow that convention. These people did give evidence.
In terms of what you can say, is there anything you would want people to know about Nicola that they don't know that's not publicly out there?
There's probably stuff that kind of isn't really well known about her. And one of the things, it's out there, but Nicola, this was her previous life. This was so long ago for her. And she undoubtedly chose the wrong path and did some terrible things. But she's also been punished significantly for it in ways that people would never understand and could never learn, because I'm not allowed to talk about it. But what they should know is, she had a particular life, and this was all when she was much younger and single. And since that time, she left, she went away. She obviously had some problems with her health. She almost died. And then she had her children, and she was doing really well in a different industry of childcare and stuff. And she won awards for it. She won an award which you'll find online. And then this all came up.
Oh, I see. Dragged her back into it.
And just ruined her life. And she's a person at risk of her safety, but it's also impacted. So it's a different person is what I'm trying to say. The Nicola of back then is a different person to the Nicola of today. But she's unfortunately having to live with the fallout, which she feels every day in a way that people just do not understand. And I just can't talk about it, but it's horrific.
One of the things we've obviously talked about is all the bad things that came from this. And obviously the, legislation we've talked about today and all that kind of thing. But has anything good come of this whole saga?
It's funny because I want to say yes wholeheartedly, but, even the legislation that came out after the Royal Commission about the use of informers, it still allows for the possibility that a lawyer could be used. It's just ridiculous.
Oh, I wondered about that. So they haven't made it blanket.
It reads as almost blanket, but they never have ruled out anything. It would be nigh on impossible, really, but just come up and ban it. And there are many police officers I've come to meet through Victoria Police who generally are decent coppers who have tarnished by this brush, who it just isn't them. But I'm afraid as an institution, they still have serious problems.
So you think the big before stuff was just the police trying to sort of character blackmail more than anything
We did
else?
a month of it at the beginning, and because it came in late, they're going, oh my God, we actually got some evidence about early on. It was just bullshit. So it's
more the police, you think, justifying how it's happened earlier and
trying to chuck mud at her, saying, oh, she was always this. They were trying to pin it all on her during the commission.
But I guess the thing is, like you say, she's paid the price for all of this and not a single copper has been held responsible.
Not one.
So look at this, you've turned Samudu. We were talking about punching her in the throat earlier and now you're like, poor thing, he's convinced you.
Well, it's what I did as well, actually. But I was anti her conduct to begin with, but, like all of our clients, you meet them and you see,
Yes.
it was a
hear their
perfect
side.
storm in some ways. They were onto a good thing and just couldn't give it up either.
Yeah, exactly. Like a drug. They're all
Yep.
addicts. Yeah.
They know it was bad, but they're like, oh, just
Yeah.
one more time. Or, oh, God,
Yeah,
there's something.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Rishi, thank you so much for coming on our podcast, That's Just Criminal. We really appreciate the time and the chat and the information that you've given us. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So, Muru, last week when we had Wayne afterwards, I said to you, is it just me or did Wayne have a really good radio voice? I think we have to agree, Rishi also had a good radio voice and a face for television. Mother, may I?
I'm not going to argue with you there. Absolutely. We can happily have him back talking about any topic in person.
I know, we're all a little bit in love with him now, but he was just super chill. Like, he didn't have, I can't answer that. He wasn't precious about being a high-rolling Melbourne barrister. He was like, yep, I'll talk about that. It's chill, it's cash, and a bit funny.
He was just open-minded. He just wanted to see it from all angles, and he didn't seem to get sort of stressed about it. It didn't seem to have gone to his head. He was just trying to look at the positives.
Quietly persuasive, eh?
He wasn't sort of overselling it. There was just this quiet confidence about him. I think he would be an amazing litigator in court to watch.
He's just a very gently persuasive, because we just didn't realize it was even happening, but by the end of the podcast we were like, oh, we like Nicola Gobbo now, or at least feel really sorry for her. Thank you for being part of our barrister life here on That's Just Criminal.
Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts.